George, with the French presidential elections, there is a debate going on. It's been going on for some time within France about how it relates to Europe. Is it not an interesting contradiction that France has actually been at the lead of the creation of the European Union and expanding a multinational, international organisation here that's become stronger and stronger, while at the same time it has been a nation of small farmers and keeping things at the local level. Is there a contradiction there? And if so, where is that going? What are the lead candidates saying about Europe and France's relationship to it?
Well, the lead candidates are trying to avoid the subject as much as they can, simply because they know that, particularly when it comes to the agricultural policy, which France has been challenged on, particularly by the British government, most of the money that goes on the CAP, as it is known, the agricultural policy that pays farmers to keep farming things at a higher price, and which of course is one of the problems with the third world, if you go beyond France, in that the third world is then faced with cheap exports of food and other commodities that they ought to be growing themselves and sending to Europe, and instead Europe is being paid to produce them, and as a result they're not able to send their things there. The question of immigration is an economic one in the first place. We all hope that eventually the world and globalization will produce good standards of living everywhere in the world, but that's going to take a long, long time. And meanwhile, immigrants do get a chance to jump where they have a chance to make more money. Now, the problem in France has been that the French have been very proud of having a policy in which every person is equal, and all are French men. That includes the women. And as a result, discrimination is not recognized, even though it takes place. But legally, it is not recognized, and there are no procedures to facilitate the entrance of women and others who are discriminated against, and particularly immigrants, into jobs, into positions, public life, and so on. And this is one which is a problem for the French, for any French politician, and which politicians speak on both sides of it, because the idea that all French are equal and therefore they should all be treated the same way is very strong. It's very different from the Anglo-Saxon approach and some other countries in Europe. Now, your question about Europe, yes, the French have been at the head of Europe under de Gaulle. They tried very hard to keep the leadership. However, Germany's reunification and the fact that Germany is so big and is economically more powerful has changed that to some degree. The British entrance after some time also changed it. So France is becoming one of the powers in Europe, but certainly as Europe grows and becomes 26 and more countries, France cannot have the same veto power, the same powers that it had at the beginning.
But as a country similar to Britain, which has nuclear weapons, and a country that sees itself as a global power, one of the permanent members on the Security Council, where does that leave the sense of French identity within Europe? Do they see Europe as an opportunity to retain that sense of being a world power, or do they see it as a threat as it expands and goes towards Turkey and further east?
Well, the former French Commissioner for Europe, Jacques Attali, wrote just today in an article, and he's a socialist, and he was pointing out basically various domestic issues and socialism, as opposed to worrying about this issue of influence in Europe. I think at this point the French continue to have influence. The grandeur of France, the old ideas that just because you're one of the 5 powers with veto in the United Nations Security Council is, I think, to some degree being bypassed by the fact that, among other things, the Americans or anybody else, the Russians, the Chinese, can act unilaterally on many issues and don't bring them to the Security Council. And the issues that do go to the Security Council, you have contrary ideas and they're vetoing each other. The idea of having nuclear weapons spread to anybody who wants them is not a very pleasant idea for humanity to contemplate. We already have lots of weapons around. We have been trying to reduce them. Happily, the British may even get there. The French have not, but they don't have the large amounts. It's the Russians, the Americans, and of course the Chinese are building new ones. And perhaps Iran and of course
who
we know.
have we left out that has all?
Well, of course Israel had some
Yes,
and doesn't. It refuses to say it does.
That's right.
North
And
Korea
even you
and
were
others.
very concerned to not spoil the status quo.